Some Hollywood stars have fallen because of a failed film. Some have lost everything because of financial scandals or career missteps. But Ezra Miller's case is different. What haunts the public isn't the fact that a famous actor is embroiled in a scandal. It's the feeling that it was all foreshadowed, only nobody really paid attention until everything exploded at once. And when it happened, people began to look back at Ezra's entire journey from a completely different perspective. Before becoming Hollywood's most controversial figure, Ezra was considered a role model for a generation of promising young actors. Born in New Jersey, Ezra didn't grow up as a typical Hollywood child star. As a child, he studied opera to improve his stutter and quickly displayed a distinct personality. Not following a traditional academic path for long, Ezra left school early to pursue acting, a risky decision that, at the time, seemed to pay off. His early roles quickly caught the attention of filmmakers because Ezra was unlike typical young actors. He possessed an unpredictable energy, a quirky yet captivating style, and the ability to make complex characters feel incredibly real. The major turning point came when Ezra consistently landed roles in major projects and began to join the ranks of Hollywood's most sought-after young actors. From independent films to top-tier franchises, everything seemed to be falling into place perfectly. The climax came when he was chosen to play The Flash, one of the world's most famous superheroes, and simultaneously appear in another blockbuster film franchise. At that point, his future seemed almost predetermined. Fame, money, and A-list stardom were only a matter of time. But looking back, small details began to change the picture. Stories of impulsive behavior, boundary-crossing situations, and seemingly insignificant incidents emerged quite early. At the time, they were seen as artistic personality, uniqueness, or simply rebellious moments of youth. No one thought these could be the first signs of a much larger series of events silently unfolding behind the Hollywood lights. But if the first part of the story was the rise of a unique star, the next part is when things started to spiral out of control. What makes Ezra Miller's case so perplexing isn't the fact that they were scandals. Hollywood has never lacked scandals, but the speed and magnitude of their escalation. Initially, they were just strange moments, a few controversial actions that quickly faded away. But over time, these individual events began to connect into a pattern of behavior that many no longer viewed as mere rebellion. The period of the pandemic became a major turning point. As much of the entertainment industry came to a standstill, Ezra virtually disappeared from the familiar rhythm of Hollywood and spent more time living in isolation. This is when a series of unverified but persistent stories began to surface. Spiritual gatherings, chaotic living environments, strained relationships, and increasingly unpredictable behavior. Initially, many dismissed these as exaggerated images given Ezra's eccentric style. But then, several viral videos made it impossible to ignore. There were moments when the public began to question whether something more serious was lurking behind the artist's unconventional image. His public outbursts, incidents with strangers, cryptic statements, and a series of mishaps began to completely change how people perceived Ezra. This peaked during his time in Hawaii, where his disruptive behavior constantly made headlines. Instead of the image of a talented actor preparing to become the next generation superhero, the public began to see someone increasingly acting as if no limits applied to him. It's noteworthy that at that time, Ezra's career hadn't collapsed yet. Major projects were still underway. The biggest film of his career was still in production. This made the story even more controversial. Because when a celebrity is repeatedly embroiled in scandals, but faces almost no immediate consequences, the public begins to wonder, is this just a personal crisis, or the result of a system that readily ignores warning signs as long as the star continues to generate profit? And that was just the beginning of even more serious accusations that followed. But all that had happened before only truly became a full-blown crisis, when more serious allegations began to surface. These were no longer stories of impulsive behavior or occasional public lapses in control. For the first time, the public began to confront a far more unsettling question. Was what they were witnessing a pattern of manipulation and control? And it was then that Ezra Miller's image began to crumble in an almost irreparable way. One of the most attention-grabbing incidents involved Toccata Iron Eyes. According to allegations from his family, the relationship between the two began years before Toccata was very young. The family claimed that, over time, Ezra became the center of her life, distancing her from her old environment and completely changing her lifestyle. The descriptions revolved around psychological control, isolating her from loved ones, and creating emotional dependence. However, Toccata publicly denied being coerced and asserted that his decisions were his personal choices. This contrast between the two sides makes the case particularly controversial and difficult to assess from the outside. But what drew public attention wasn't just a single story. Simultaneously, many other accounts emerged from people who had interacted with Ezra. Some described his living environment as chaotic and unpredictable. Others spoke of extreme spiritual beliefs and a feeling of being subjected to a very powerful system of personal influence. Several investigative media reports subsequently compiled these accounts, creating a picture that fueled public concern. However, it's important to note that not all accusations led to legal conclusions or were confirmed in court. Nevertheless, in the public eye, the damage was almost complete. Because the image he had built up over many years, a talented, mysterious, and unique actor, was now replaced by a completely different one, unpredictable, controversial, and blurring the lines between artistic individuality and the boundaries that had been crossed. And when fame shifts from movie star to center of scandal, a career doesn't usually collapse immediately, but audience trust begins to erode rapidly. And then came the moment almost everyone thought impossible. The film, expected to make Ezra Miller the new iconic face of superhero cinema, ultimately became the marker for his disappearance from public view. Ironically, at the height of the controversy, Ezra's biggest project was still nearing its release date. Hundreds of millions of dollars had been invested. Much of the film revolved around his character, and a replacement seemed almost impossible. Hollywood faced a difficult dilemma: cancel the project and accept huge losses, or proceed with its release while the central character was embroiled in a series of scandals. Ultimately, the film was released, but instead of establishing the status of a new star, it was overshadowed by real-life questions more than the on-screen story. Promotional events were severely limited, Ezra's appearances were almost completely controlled, and media attention shifted away from his acting. While there were differing opinions on the film's quality, one thing was quite clear: Ezra's image had changed too much for audiences to view the project in the usual way. Afterward, Ezra virtually disappeared. He no longer had frequent social media activity or the frequent media appearances he once did. The few announcements focused on his treatment and self-reflection. And this is where the story shifts to a much more difficult question than whether it's right or wrong. Does someone who has caused so much controversy still have a chance to make a comeback? Hollywood has seen its fair share of comebacks. But a comeback has never depended solely on a period of absence or a new project. Ultimately, what the public wants to see isn't a promise of change, but signs of genuine change. For Ezra Miller, that answer may yet be written.